going through that period of time, it was important to me always to keep that picture alive and to try and figure out how to navigate through the issues that we were dealing with, because that vision was really important to me. This comes back to having a vision as an entrepreneur. When you're building something, you start something, it's really important to know for you what it is that you're trying to achieve. And as you quite rightly say, that can change. But if that vision isn't powerful enough, isn't meaningful enough to you, then it's so hard, the life is so hard that you'll give up, or maybe you'll burn out.
Hi, welcome to the Beyond 42 podcast, a series on navigating the uncharted territories of success and leadership beyond the product. We explore how entrepreneurs thrive, especially in the rapidly changing world of tech. I'm your host, Gökçe Gizar Clover. I'm a serial entrepreneur and community builder in the tech ecosystem, and I invite founders, investors, and experts to dive into the concept of success and how entrepreneurs build resilience. My guest today is Andrew Humphries. He's a serial entrepreneur with multiple exits. He was the co-founder of the bakery for 12 years, and he moved to an advisory board role last year after a strategic acquisition by Staged Ventures. As corporate innovation specialists and venture builders, the bakery has served in over 20 countries, working with 100 corporates, and have more than 30,000 startups, entrepreneurs, and partnerships in their ecosystem. Andrew has a strong background in sales and marketing and is still a business core. Throughout his career, he was appointed by the Prime Minister's office as Tech City Champion, helping to fuel the growth of London's Tech City. He was a dealmaker for the UK government's Global Entrepreneurship Programme, and he was voted as one of the Sunday Times Maserati 100, recognizing British business leaders who actively give back to the next generation of entrepreneurs. For many years, Andrew performed lead vocals and guitar in a rock band, now spends leisure time restoring and sailing his classic wooden boat, and occasionally sings opera. He's still working toward his big ambition of becoming a beach bum. Andrew, thank you so much for being here. Every conversation with you, I find out another unexpected and wonderful thing about you. So I'm so happy to dive into this conversation today.
That's a great pleasure, Gigi.
Thank you. So I want to start off by talking about how and why you started working with entrepreneurs, because I think this will give us an idea of how you became an entrepreneur yourself, but why are you helping entrepreneurs?
I sort of fell into entrepreneurship in a way, and I didn't really know what being an entrepreneur was. I thought I was going to, start a company or be part of an early stage company and then float on the stock market and get rich or something. I had this weird kind of vision of what it might be like.
When was that?
Oh, that was 1998. And startups weren't even called startups then, they were called .coms. And everyone was leaving the corporate world to start a .com. But later on, I realized that actually entrepreneurs and people who start businesses and create businesses and build new things are incredibly important, the driver, if you like, of pretty much everything. They create work, they create jobs, they create new things. They, build opportunities for other people to succeed. If they're successful, they then go on and often become investors and invest in other entrepreneurs who then do the same thing again. So it's like, the cycle, and it's where everything begins, which is one of the things I love about it. And finding those people and working with those people is, it's just so enthralling. And there's so many of them and so many entrepreneurs, but not very many successful ones. And it's not for everyone. Not everyone, can do that and take the risk and put everything on the line and go and do it. But today, everybody seems to think it's the thing that everyone should do. And, a lot of time they find out that it's not quite for them.
You touched on a few things. One, being successful, and the other thing is what it takes to become an entrepreneur. So I wanted to get your thought on what makes a successful entrepreneur, or what even are the qualities of an entrepreneur?
So, that's a really great question. I don't know what defines a successful entrepreneur. I guess somebody who creates something and that has some life. It doesn't have to be particularly big. It just maybe is a business that does something and creates employment, creates some work for themselves or some money for themselves, and makes them happy. Obviously, we think about successful entrepreneurs as those people who have built amazing things and raised billions of dollars and employ millions of people. But those guys are incredibly rare. I mean, they're, 2, 3, 5, I don't know how many of them there are. And then there's everybody in between. Each of those has some level of success. For me, an entrepreneur is somebody who creates a business that drives employment. And, that can be the guy that buys a post office and runs it, or it can be somebody like Mark Zuckerberg or Bill Gates or whoever else you want to talk about.
So the kind of entrepreneurs we want to talk about are the ones who are able to build lasting companies that have an impact, a positive impact in the world, and that creates organizations where people love to work at. And one of the reasons for that is, as you've mentioned, entrepreneurs are driving both economic and social change. Work is no longer a place that we just go 9 to 5 to make some money. It's where we find belonging, connection, and a purpose for our capabilities and passions. That's the kind of entrepreneurs we want to highlight. And I want to find out a little bit about your work at the bakery, because you work with thousands of entrepreneurs and helped identify high potential ones and worked on partnering them up with corporates. Can you tell us about the inception of the bakery and the impact you had?
Sure. So the inception of the bakery started many years before we started the bakery. It sort of started in my head as the thing that was needed to help entrepreneurs that had built something find where it should live. I think we now talk about that as product market fit. But early days, people would often build something that they thought, oh, well, this is a really cool piece of tech, and I think it might be able to do this. And then people didn't want to buy it, or it didn't work, or it didn't prove enough benefit, but it was still a valuable technology. And all they had missed was the place where it really kind of fitted. And that happened to me in a business that I was an early founder of, or an early stage partner with. And we had to really quickly pivot the idea. And I happily found the solution by complete accident, by talking to a guy in a bank who told me about a particular problem that they had with fraud. And I said, well, I think our technology could fix that. And then that top technology went on to become the world's biggest fraud alerting solution. And you know what? I never knew that that problem existed, and none of us did when we built the technology. And I realized that there were probably hundreds or thousands of entrepreneurs that had exactly the same problem. And so the inception of the bakery was, why don't we find the problems within large corporations that are buried inside these companies that only the people who really know about them know about, and then find the technologists or the entrepreneurs with a thing and kind of match them up. And it was very much a matchmaking kind of solution to add value to both sides. And that was the very original kind of Mark I bakery, which came about back in 2013. And we realized that the people loved that, and it was great. But what we also realized was that it was really hard to do. First of all, finding the problems and the challenges that existed and prioritizing them. And then secondly, finding the very specific person technology match. Because often you'd find the technology, but the people were either not interested, or they wanted to go in a different direction, or they just weren't very good entrepreneurs. The other thing that we quickly realized is that, you know what, not everybody is great at selling stuff and realizing that this is the product market fit and that there was an opportunity here. So that sounds a bit arrogant, but I think that often we've seen people kind of bury their head in the sand, keep kind of digging away at something that they really believed in, and then failing after many years when they perhaps could have had an opportunity to build something. And that comes back to our original discussion about, well, what is an entrepreneur? An entrepreneur might be somebody who almost doesn't care what they build as long as they build a business. Sometimes entrepreneurs get, and I know you've had this experience, get wrapped around the axle about the thing that they're building. It's their baby, and they don't want to change it. They have an initial vision and they don't want to change that. We saw that a lot, and we still see that an awful lot.
It seems one of the things that make a good entrepreneur is one who builds but also talks to the people with the problems. And that has been, thankfully, for the last 5-10 years, especially like customer development has been a big part of it. But you also mentioned sales. And one of the things we talk about is sometimes tech entrepreneurs are great at building product. What happens after you have built the product? What are the things, the skills that they should be developing? What are the things they should be focusing on?
So look, I have a very firm view on this, and that is that you can build the best thing in the world, but if you can't sell it or nobody wants it, it's useless. It has no value. And again, one of the things that drove the bakery back in the 2010s or whenever it was that we were thinking about it was we saw lots of people raising millions of dollars of money for things that they had never sold. And all that they had done was convince an investor that it was a good idea. And of course, I think investors are a bit more savvy now. But back in the day, people would literally pile loads of money into something that had never sold a cent, which seemed ridiculous to me. And actually, the papers were full and the news was full of, look at this amazing startup. They've raised $20 million or $100 million. Tom, my partner, and I would look at each other and go, well, this is nuts. They've never sold anything. How can they do that? And we decided to build a business that helped people sell things and actually create a market. And because that's really where the real value is. And what we also found was that if you could sell some stuff to somebody, then two things, you had some money coming in, so you maybe didn't need to raise as much or maybe at all. And secondly, you could raise money at a much higher valuation because you had some traction. And that became super important. So if you're a true entrepreneur, I believe you have to be able to commercialize your product, monetize your product, sell your product. You have to be a salesman. You have to be a business developer. You have to know how to make money out of the thing that you're doing. It seems obvious, but it's surprisingly, it doesn't happen that often. And what we found, again, one of the things when dealing with these thousands of entrepreneurs all the time at the bakery, you notice is that there are some people who are just really great at that. And you know that those are the ones that are really going to succeed earlier. Maybe the other ones will succeed, maybe, if they find the right people and surround themselves with the right people. But some of them are obnoxious and, arrogant. And some are just really great salespeople. Why not be a great technologist and build great stuff and be a great salesperson as well? And then you have much better chance of succeeding earlier, let's say.
I can imagine some of the, especially like founders with technical backgrounds thinking, this is not what I signed up for. I did not want to become a salesperson. But even if they don't develop those skills, there's still lots of stakeholder management, whether it's, even if you're a technologist, there's the clients, if you're not selling.
So look, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a technical entrepreneur, if you're building a business, you have to sell all the time. You have to sell to investors, you have to sell to employees, you have to sell to co-founders, you have to sell to people, who you want to come on board as stakeholders that need to be that kind of engaging person. And if you don't want to call it being a salesperson, fine, don't call it that, but that's what it is. You're selling your business, you're selling your idea, you're selling yourself all the time, and those people are the ones that are just more successful. And it's easy to see them. And you're right, we mustn't kind of categorize people here, but there are a lot of technical people who struggle with that and say, well, look, I just want to build something. And that's fine. And you can do that to a point. But at some point, in order for it to go anywhere and scale, you have to be able to engage people and you have to be able to get people involved in it and show them how great it is, because it won't typically just do it itself.
When you were at the bakery, you facilitated a lot of partnerships between startups and corporates. What was that process like, both in terms of understanding the corporate's needs and identifying high potential startups who could help with that?
So it's a fascinating process. And again, when we started, we had no idea how to do it. So we just invented an approach, and it was very haphazard and based on chemistry in a room, physical chemistry in a room. People would tell us what their problems were. But much like when you're going to buy a house or buy something at an auction or whatever it happens to be, you think you want something, but actually you don't know until you see it. and you might have a whole bunch of criteria, but when you see the actual thing, a lot of that criteria goes out the window. So that's exactly what happened with corporates and startups. I remember our very first, what we called matchmaking day, when we had 5 corporates in a room with a bunch of challenges. And I think we got 30 or 40 startups that had potential solutions. And it was mayhem. It was great. People used to come up to us at the end of these days and go, that was the most exhilarating day I've had at work in years, so that was great. And they'd see things that they'd never seen before. And they'd go, well, we could make this into something amazing. We introduced a great little startup to BMW, who then went on and became the world's first sort of chatbot before chatbots existed in a BMW car, and then went on to raise $20 million and became a super successful AI startup. And that was the very beginning, but BMW had no clue that that was what he was going to get. So I think we based it around chemistry, and it sort of comes back to what we were talking about before. Those entrepreneurs that did well in that chemistry environment, one-to-one, one to a few, and could hold an audience, tended to do better. Then there were some really super technical people who learnt quite quickly that if they could take their technology and make it simple and show why it was so great, then they'd be successful too. Then at the bakery, that matchmaking and that coming together and built over the years what I think is one of the most robust technology challenge matching solution on the planet.
I know one of the reasons you wanted to do that is to help these founders get some value into the company so that at least when they go out fundraising,
Totally.
they're in a better position, a stronger position to fundraise. And it sounds like it's not that they were selling to these corporates, but they were solving their problems. And even that mindset shift, I mean, sometimes people forget that they're building products that are actually solving problems. So you're not selling something, you're giving them a solution to a pain that they're struggling with.
I mean, it sounds obvious, doesn't it? And of course, we know that intrinsically, but so often we get wrapped up in selling, here are the features of my technology, whatever it happens to be. And it's back to very basics of selling, which is, well, find out what the customer wants and solve that problem, find out what the pain is and solve that problem. And also, interestingly, figure out how much that problem is worth, because then that tells you what you can sell your solution for. And you might be, surprised that solving this issue in a large corporation is worth many, many millions. And therefore, just selling it once, you can sell it for half that, I don't know, whatever it happens to be, and everyone benefits. And we found that really interesting, particularly where entrepreneurs had created what they thought was a B2C product, where they might solve pain for a whole bunch of consumers. But by engaging with the corporate, they could A, reach a whole bunch of consumers quicker, and B, make more money by selling to a corporate who would then solve the problem as a B2B2C kind of solution. And we changed a lot of people's attitudes that way as well. A lot of entrepreneurs pivoted to become B2B2C when they realized the power of their solution and the value of their solution that way.
At the bakery, you worked in over 20 countries with over 100 corporates, and there's over 30,000 startups, entrepreneurs in your ecosystem. And the bakery itself, obviously, the company grew, the organization grew. Can you tell me a little bit about that growth experience for you? How did you build the team? What was the culture like? I mean, this is, of course, as an entrepreneur, one of the most important things we have to deal with is managing the co-founder dynamics.
Well, when we started the company, we were already quite old. And we had had businesses before. Both Tom and I had businesses before. We kind of wanted somewhere where we enjoyed going to work, where we liked the people that we were working with. We didn't want to raise money because we had both raised money before and hadn't really enjoyed the experience. And, we wanted to do something that we just loved doing. And that was the initial culture. That sort of continued through the business. And the business grew pretty steadily, actually, between 2013 and 2019, 5 years, we grew to about 20 people here in the UK. We opened an office in Brazil, and there were about 7 or 8 people there. And then COVID struck, and there were all sorts of challenges with that. We had to move from a face-to-face environment to a remote environment and figure out whether the process could stand that. And we figured out ways to do that. And over the years in between, we grew to about 70 or 80 people around the world at the beginning of last year, 2023. And we became more managers of people rather than obviously doing the work. When we started, we were doing everything and, making the tea. I remember cleaning vomit out of the toilets. You have to do everything. But it was very much a family. People overuse the word family, and I don't like to use the word family, but everybody was very much in it and loved being at the bakery. And we've had so many wonderful employees over the years. Some are still there. Others have gone on to do other amazing things. But I think I like to think that they all, look back fondly at their time there, and they all grew through their period of time there and understood lots of things as well. Because I think the other thing that entrepreneurs do is they create places where people grow. They create employment, but they also create, opportunities, which I think is even more important now than perhaps it ever was before, for people to experience and grow and then go off and do other things beyond what they do at the business. I don't know how many employees we've had, but it's been many hundreds over the years. There was a lot of, I use this word quite a lot, but there was a lot of love at the bakery. And, we would care for people and we would care for each other. And I think people saw that. And I think our clients saw that. And I think often, and again, I think people underestimate how important it is to have a place where clients want to be. It's interesting, the culture that you create, the business that you create, and the environment that you create kind of attracts people in, and people want to be part of that. It's been great the last 6 months or so since I actually exited from the business, speaking to people who said, it was just amazing working with your team. Your guys were great. It's been a wonderful experience, and people still do that now. And I love that we've been able to create an environment where, you're doing work and you're adding value, but you're enjoying it at the same time.
And I love that because, as I mentioned to you before, when you shared about that love in your organization that you had also with your co-founder, that inspired me. I even titled a chapter in my book, The L Word, because it's not used enough and we forget how powerful that is. Can you tell me why was it so important, and where is it coming from that you had love, and how has that love helped you probably through the more difficult time of your journey?
Sometimes I'll go and coach young entrepreneurs who are starting out on their journey at universities or at accelerators or wherever they are. And they'll often ask me, well, how do I find a co-founder and what should I be looking for? And I know you have the same thing. And I will often say that your co-founder will be somebody who you spend most of your time with, way more than probably you will with your partner. And yet, isn't it fascinating? You would often just pick a co-founder and go into business with them, but you wouldn't do that with a partner, a life partner. And yet you're going to spend way more time with them. And in a way, you are choosing a partner for a long period of time. You're going to create something. There's going to be battles. There's going to be arguments. There's going to be disagreements. There's going to be great times. And you need to love that person. And you need to be happy if they're successful. And they have to love you.
What do you mean by that? Be happy if they're successful? Would you not want them to be?
So I learned this lesson at a previous business that I was in. And, there were a bunch of founders, directors of this business. And one of them I spent quite a bit of time with. And over time, I realized that I just didn't like him. He was misogynistic. He was a bit arrogant. He was just not very nice. And then I realized that I was doing work, spending a lot of my hard work, giving up my life, effectively, part of my life, to succeed in this business. And of course, I would benefit, but then I realized he would benefit too. And actually, I wasn't particularly happy about that because I was thinking, well, he's going to benefit off my hard work. And actually, he was a bigger shareholder than me. And I was thinking, he's going to benefit more than me. And there was a little bit of me going, I'm not sure I like that. So it made me realize that because you're going to give so much, and again, a lot of people don't realize how much, But because you're going to give so much, you have to really be happy that everyone around you is going to benefit as a result of your hard work. And you'll benefit as a result of theirs, of course. So therefore, having that kind of connection, that pleasure in seeing them achieve and being successful has got to be a main part of it. Now, of course, things change and people fall out. And that's happened to me a number of times. And you have to figure out how you're going to deal with that. And again, I spend a lot of time with some entrepreneurs helping them figure out how to perhaps part company with an original founder or original shareholder.
How does that look like? Because some people we talk to, they have great co-founder relationships, or they love their co-founders. They've been friends, but they don't know how to manage this dynamic.
Yes.
And they probably are not reflecting on, what do I want to do? How do you help them?
So look, again, part of the problem here is none of this becomes a problem until something goes well. When you're struggling and, there's no money, it doesn't matter. Who cares? It's no problem. It's when you either raise a bunch of money or you're starting to grow or you're selling really well and you're being successful. You look around and you think, well, actually, I'm jealous. He's jealous. Something's going on. There's a problem here. He's not working as hard as me. He's not working as hard as other people. Hasn't contributed, whatever it happens to be. And you think to yourself, or you stop talking about it. You can't bring those things up in the right way. You're arguing, and that's negatively impacting the business. So that happens quite a lot, I would say.
And what can founders do if, let's say, if one of them found themselves in that situation? Is there a way to address that?
It's one of the hardest things, I think. I don't think there's ever an easy answer. But I read something once that said it's better to have a hole in your business than an asshole in your business. And I think that what that means is it's really important to stop it as early as possible. It's really hard to do that because you think, I'll do it later, I'll wait. And then, you can't do anything about it.
What are some of the things that you and Tom have done to make sure that this kind of thing doesn't blow up?
I'm very lucky because Tom is definitely the best person to start a business with. He's super smart. He's incredibly intelligent about all of these things. He's very emotionally aware as well. We have our differences, but we seem to cope with them very well. I'm pretty laid back and I tend to go with things, but we always tend to see things the same way. Ultimately, we'll look at a problem and we'll both tend to come up with the same resolution. However, we had to buy out a partner some years into the business, and we should have done it earlier. And we didn't, and we procrastinated about it, and it just became more difficult. We managed it in the end, but it was very, very painful, and it was very challenging. He is a great person, but we had just sort of drifted into slightly different directions. We didn't want the same things necessarily, and it was a challenging time. But I'm really happy that we managed to get through that. But it changes the dynamics and it changes the relationships. So I think it's really important when you're starting out on your entrepreneurial journey to realize that if things are successful, you have to really be able to say that you love the person and that they love you too.
I'm not going to take, I was lucky to have Tom as a founder, good enough of a response. And I want to ask you if now that you could go on a journey, or if someone else was about to go on a journey or were already in a co-founder relationship, what would you say are the things to look for? You mentioned some of them.
I think you have to have attributes that complement one another. I think everybody says this, don't they? It's no good you both being technical and nobody be able to commercialize stuff. It's better if one person manages certain aspects of the business, the other person manages other aspects of the business. I've never been a particularly great financial manager or operational manager. Actually, give me an operation to run and I'll break it. I'm just not focused on those kinds of things as well. As I say, I'm lucky because Tom was great at those kinds of things and, could have a vision and could operate something and could make it happen, seamlessly. And it was really great.
And were you intentional about it before you started working, or was that something you figured out later on?
Because we had both had businesses before, it was definitely something that we saw as being beneficial to us. We knew the strengths of the other, And we had been friends for some years, and we'd done small projects together, and those had worked really well, partly because of that kind of complement of skills. I've always been pretty good at selling stuff and engaging people and building propositions and taking products to market. He's been really good at actually building the product and figuring out how it works. I always say to people that he must have been one of those kids that took things to bits, when he was a kid, radios and TVs, to see how they worked. So he was really good at actually making the product really work and really sing. That was a real good complement of skills and talent. But also, we both had to have the same vision of what we wanted. And we had to, I suppose this is the other thing that we should talk about a little bit, is what do you want? Because you're building a business, you're going in and becoming an entrepreneur, you're creating something. Well, what do you want out of the back end of it? And we both had agreed up front that, what the kind of lifestyle that we'd wanted to create and the kind of business that we'd wanted to create. And we hadn't necessarily written it down on a bit of paper, but we'd certainly talked about it. Again, I think it's true in entrepreneurship as in life. You should talk to your partner about where you're going and what you want and what it needs to look like at the end, because otherwise you get halfway there and you realize you're on different paths.
And it can, especially in entrepreneurship, it can change what the work is, even where you're going could change as long as it's still serving the purpose that you care about. Have you had, I know you said you didn't write them down, but have you had intentional discussions about that, or was it just happening?
Sure. Yeah, no, we had. For me, it was never a case of building something huge and raising lots of money and becoming fabulously wealthy and working super hard. For me, it was very much about creating a lifestyle that gave me what I want. And I have relatively simple pleasures.
Like what?
I like to sail, and I have a boat, which I enjoy, but it's not a super duper fabulous yacht. It's a small wooden boat that I enjoy restoring. It's kind of simple like that. I like to live in the countryside, and I don't like to live in London. And I wanted to live in a nice place, and my partner and I wanted to go and do the small things that people enjoy. I kind of, just have simple kind of pleasures. I don't want a Ferrari. I have a classic car, and I drive around in that. Those were my kind of touchstones, and I wanted to enjoy the time that I have. And as I said at the beginning, I wanted to enjoy going to work, and I wanted to go to work with people that I liked. And those things were most important to me. And Tom was the same. We both agreed that, it'd be great to have a really cool business that did some great stuff, but we never really wanted to become super mega rich at the end.
Everything you're describing seems like you have such a full, peaceful, joyful, happy life. And I would consider that as being successful in life. And I know, especially being around a lot of very ambitious tech entrepreneurs as well, who wants to raise billions, reach millions. Has your definition of success and this kind of life changed over time? Was there a time where you were also aspiring to different things? I know you had a big ambition to become a beach bum.
Yeah, that was my big ambition. Again, I think a lot of this comes from where one comes from. I was brought up in a pretty low rent environment. I didn't go to college. I didn't go to university. I left school when I was 16. My parents, we sort of had holidays and various bits and pieces, but we weren't well off. And so for me, anything better than that is great, right? So I feel that having a happy life and enjoying the time that we have is what the definition of success. We're only here once. We're only here for a short period of time. It was brought home to me perhaps more forcibly twice in my life. My first child sadly died when he was very, very small. And, when you lose a child, then your whole perspective changes. A day where nobody dies is a good day, right? And so you start to change the way you think about the way the world is and what's important. Now, everybody has all sorts of sadness in their life, and it's not until a particular thing often happens that they realize what's important. So that happened to me when I was in my mid-30s. Delighted to say that we went on to have more lovely children, and I have, 2 grown-up daughters and 4 grandchildren, and I'm super happy about that. And, I've really had a full life, but there's not a day really that passes that I don't think about Callum and what he meant to me. First of all, what he could have been and what he could have achieved, but also the fact that it changed my perspective on what's important. And at that time, I was working in a corporate world where, you were climbing a corporate ladder and you had this goal of becoming a director of a business and doing whatever it was and getting more cars and more money and bigger houses. And all of that sort of changed completely, almost overnight. And the thing that was really important for me was just having a happy, comfortable existence. That doesn't mean you can't enjoy nice things. And then, of course, later on, I was diagnosed with cancer, actually, a few years into starting the bakery. And that does another thing, which I didn't know, which is it makes you aware of your own mortality. And because we sort of wander through life, don't we, thinking that we're going to live forever. We know we're going to die at some point, but with some vague, distant future. And we think we're going to be really super healthy until that happens, well into our 80s and 90s. I was diagnosed at 52 with potentially life-threatening cancer. I'm delighted that over a number of years they've managed to cure it, suppress it. They haven't actually cured it, but suppressed it so that I can enjoy the rest of my life. But again, that makes you think, well, what do you really want? And do you really want to spend all of your time building stuff that benefits you, but also benefits other people, and dealing with all of those, people who are sometimes not as aware of these things as you. And so success for me, as you've said, is really just being comfortable, having what you want, and, enjoying the time that you have with the people around you that you really care about. And, that to me is a successful entrepreneur.
Thank you so much for sharing these. You have such a big impact on everyone around you, not just the founders that you've touched, but everyone around you. All of these things that you've been through, I suspect you felt like giving up at some points or had self-doubt or questioning. How did you find your way back and still have this hope and energy looking ahead?
I suppose one of the things that I've, again, always been blessed with is an immense self-confidence. I can't say that I've ever had much self-doubt. And I don't know why, that is. I can't say why. I just have always thought that, if somebody can do it, then I can probably do it.
Was it also when you were growing up, maybe?
Yeah, maybe when I was growing up. Again, I've done some lovely things. I was a glider pilot when I was young, and I was flying gliders around the country at 16, 17 years old, landing in fields and going to places, and people would look at me askance because I didn't realize it at the time, but of course all they saw was this little kid getting out of an aeroplane, and I thought it was perfectly normal. And so I kind of always had this kind of ability to have a belief in myself, which I think has been really powerful in my life. I know that other people struggle with that self-doubt, and I can't say that I have ever really had that. Maybe I've never been in a position where it's become an issue. But I think definitely, and in terms of sticking with things, most of it is because I've had to. You kind of have to get out of bed and go to work, especially when you've got kids. You've got to put food on the table, and you've got to pay the mortgage, and you've got to, do what you need to do. And certainly in my earlier years as an entrepreneur, that was what drove me. I had to do it. And there was no alternative. And I think sometimes it's good to have that drive. I know that a lot of entrepreneurs come to entrepreneurship young, and I actually think that's the best time to do it because you've got nothing to lose. But sometimes I think maybe they would benefit from a bit of, you've got to get this done, otherwise there's going to be a problem. So I don't know. I think that it was just something that I had to do, and I've always had that drive to just get up and go to work and get it done and make sure it happened. And then, of course, as your business grows and you've got people that you're employing, you have to keep doing it to pay the wages and meet the payroll every month. So that becomes the driver as well.
Has it gotten stressful and overwhelming, or have you ever been on the verge of burnout or actually burned out?
So I think during COVID and the recovery period from COVID, it was an incredibly stressful time. And I think that's true of many people who ran businesses, particularly in Europe. I think, again, we were quite lucky here in the UK because of some of the actions that the government took. But in the same way, some of those things created their own issues that you couldn't have foreseen. So maybe what that did is it made you keep people on when you maybe wouldn't have done. And whilst that might have been great at the time, it gave you a sort of false sense of where the business was. So what that did was it created this immense pressure to keep people on and to keep going, when actually maybe what you could have done is pulled your horns in a little bit sooner. But again, of course, nobody knew what was going on. It was a once in a multiple generation event. So yeah, that was incredibly stressful. I think 3 years really, from the end of 2019, beginning of 2020 to 2023, were incredibly challenging for many businesses. And it was true very much of Tom and I in the bakery. And there were times when we would look at each other and go, what on earth is going to happen here? And I'm super proud that we survived and that we came through and that we were successful. And I'm super proud of everyone in the company, all of our partners and all of the team members, for sticking with it and for making the business grow. And I'm incredibly proud that we managed at the end of 2023 to raise a significant investment for Tom and I to actually take a little bit of a back seat as advisory members and exiting from the business, and to raise funds from an amazing set of investors who are now able to take the business forward with the team members and our partners who have taken over the day-to-day running of the business, to grow the business in the way that we always wanted to, expanding it internationally, growing into the United States, which we had never managed to do. We had planned to do that in 2020, and then obviously COVID hit, and to also create a fund to invest in some of the startups, which is something that we, again, always wanted to be able to, never were able to, sadly. But yeah, I'm super proud of what we've achieved in that period. But you coming back to your question about, were we close to burnout? I think looking back, yeah, we were close. We never quite got there. But I think if you spoke to my wife, she would say, yeah, he was really close.
Oh, wow. So how come did you not end up burning out? Were you really aware of it? And what were some of the renewal practices that you had, things that replenished your physical, mental, emotional resources so that you could reconnect with why you were doing this and took care of your well-being?
So I mentioned my wife. Look, we've now been married for 10 years and we have a wonderful relationship. And I think that she keeps me grounded. Anyone who knows me will know that I wear this little stone around my neck, which I call my anchor. And every time I see myself in the mirror or look at myself in the morning, I see it. And embodied in this stone, it's not a particularly important stone. It means nothing other than it sort of reminds me of all the things that I want, which is to have a happy life with my partner and to enjoy the time that I have, and for my children to be healthy, and for me to actually have a little boat that I enjoy, and one day to have the house that I want because I'm house hunting at the moment, and have that life that I've pictured for myself. And that's what this sort of anchor embodies for me, the vision of what I want. I think that going through that period of time, it was important to me always to keep that picture alive and to try and figure out how to navigate through the issues that we were dealing with, because that vision was really important to me. This comes back to having a vision as an entrepreneur. When you're building something, you start something, it's really important to know for you what it is that you're trying to achieve. And as you quite rightly say, that can change. It might change at various points. But if that vision isn't powerful enough, isn't meaningful enough to you, then it's so hard, the life is so hard that you'll give up, or maybe you'll burn out, and maybe you will anyway. But if the vision isn't, then certainly you'll give up sooner than you would otherwise.
And it's so important to have that vision. And like you said, reminding yourself of it, because in the day-to-day of things, you may lose sight of it. And it sounds like also in your case, I can imagine it must have been a really difficult decision to walk away from what you've been building for so long with so much pride and so much joy and happiness, but then also feeling content or even prouder that you're stepping back so it could grow even beyond you. How does that feel? How has that process been?
So it feels wonderful, if I'm honest. It's very relieving because, building a business and owning a business and growing a business year after year takes a lot out of you and there's a lot of pressure associated with it. So for me, certainly I felt a sense of relief at the point that it occurred. I'm also, as you say, really happy that the business will now actually be able to achieve things that we could never have done with our limited resources, and will be able to do the things that we had envisaged it to be able to do. So I think that is really important. And, more importantly, again, a lot of people don't talk about this when it comes to entrepreneurship. Building a business and growing a business fundamentally takes human energy. That is what is involved in it. You can build some technology, you can do some stuff, whatever it happens to be, but fundamentally the thing that makes any business successful and then scale is the actual human energy that goes into it. And often that comes primarily from the founders of the business. And that energy, I suppose, the use of that energy and the expenditure of that energy is what causes burnout, because when you've expended all of your energy, you've got nothing more to give, and yet the business is still demanding more because it hasn't got to where it needs to be, then you burn out, I guess. You've expended everything that you've got. Now, I just turned 60, and I'm a pretty energetic person, but I was kind of running out of energy. And as you get older, you don't have as much energy to give. And so, I'm really happy that Marconi and Felipe, who are our partners who grew the business in Brazil, are now able to take over the entire business, Marconi as CEO and Felipe as Chief Growth Officer, to build the business internationally. They're younger than us, and they have that energy, and they can put their energy into the business, which is what the business needs in order for it to succeed. Had it still been us, I'm sure it would have continued to grow, but I don't think it would have been as powerful because it didn't have as much human energy in it. So I guess that's my philosophy of business is, and a lot of people think, well, it's just selling stuff and building stuff. No, it's about human energy. And when I meet founders, if I find that energy in them and you can tell whether they've got it or not, then I feel that they will be successful, whether it's in this business or the next one that they create.
So a couple of things. One, burnout has 3 components. One of them is actual exhaustion, mental, physical exhaustion. The other one is cynicism and isolation, which is basically doubting the significance of the work that you're doing, that you end up seeing every relationship as transactional, that you lose sight of what you are doing it. And I think that ties back into having a clear vision. But also I can see in entrepreneurship this happens because you're putting in so much effort and not seeing the results of those efforts quickly or at all sometimes. And the third one is sense of self-accomplishment, which actually founders have a lot of. There was actually a new research that came out that looked at the DNAs of unicorn founders, and they found out 3 things. That it's people who don't have a plan B, people who have a chip on their shoulder, and the third one is that they have this unlimited self-belief. They called them ambitious rebels.
Right.
Thinking about all these things, because you have been identifying high potential founders as part of your work with corporates, but you've also been building a team now that you've left your baby to. What have you learned about building a team in a growing business, in an early business?
Some of the things I've learned is that, again, and this probably flies in the face of some kind of attitudes that exist in the world today. When you're building a business initially, it's important to have people who kind of feel the same, and you can communicate in the same way with one another. And that sometimes means, sadly, that you kind of have to pick from a similar group, and they kind of have to identify with one another. And it's not until you've grown beyond a certain size that you can then try to become more diverse, because diversity is incredibly important, but it can also be quite difficult to manage, because not everybody kind of gels. So I think that sometimes you end up with two phases of a business. And I think you end up with this initial phase, which is where everybody kind of thinks and believes and almost has the same cultural background and culture, understands where you're going. And that can be really super powerful and get you off the landing stage. And then as you grow, you need to bring in diverse thought and bring in diverse culture and bring in diverse attitudes so that you can expand to places that you wouldn't have got to with the same thinking. Again, entrepreneurs tend to underestimate the level of managerial and strategic kind of thinking that needs to go into that. And also the amount of work that you're going to have to do just dealing with team members. You're often not prepared for that, and you maybe haven't even had the training for it. So you have to learn quickly how to manage team members so that A, they're happy and they can do their job, and B, the other people around them see that they're in a safe place, because they don't necessarily have the same, vision or thought as you do. And why would they? They're team members. They're not the founders. So I think that's the sort of skill of being a founder, being an entrepreneur of early stage businesses, is you have to do all the work. You have to be able to do actually all of their jobs, probably better than they do. But then you have to teach them how to do it. And then you have to manage them in doing it. And that's quite hard.
It is quite hard. It sounds like in the earlier stages, having more similar thinking and beliefs helps with building trust, which is really important at the beginning of a business, because we tend to trust people who we feel are similar to us. And it sounds like it also helps with speed, because if they're already in a similar direction, you need a lot of speed and trust.
And I think that often happens naturally. You often gather people around you who are like-minded, don't you? I think that sort of happens naturally. But again, the mistake I think a lot of entrepreneurs make is that they continue doing that. And that can be a recipe for failure, because if you're just one thought process, then it doesn't allow you to then scale beyond that. You end up just being this slightly bigger version of yourself, and that's no good. You kind of need to be able to get to everywhere, and so therefore you kind of have to do this consciously. And I think for me, that's a good recipe.
You also mentioned some of the skills that founders be thinking about that's just beyond building a product or even fundraising. And I know you work with a lot of younger entrepreneurs or even aspiring entrepreneurs. One of the rather controversial thoughts that I have is I don't think entrepreneurship should be a course or a career path pushed on young people. It is a mindset that needs to be developed. It shouldn't be the first career out of college unless you've really found a problem you want to solve and the people that you want to solve it with. It sounds like it's a dangerous path if they actually go into it.
So, look, I think it's great that people, A, want to be entrepreneurs, and B, that there are entrepreneurial courses that people could go on to learn about the principles of entrepreneurship. I think what's frustrating for me from my experience when I've seen it taught in colleges and universities, two things. First of all, it's a little bit it's very outdated in terms of what they are being taught, and it's pretty low level. And what that leads to is they come out of a university course on entrepreneurship and think that they are entrepreneurs, and they then go and try and raise some money or go and speak to angels or whatever it happens to be, or investors, and they get rejected, of course, most of the time. And they get very frustrated and they end up going to work for Deloitte or a consultancy. And that's what they end up doing for the rest of their lives. And I think that's just such a waste. And I just think it should be done better. Now, look, it's great that it's being done at all, because, I think when I was younger, it didn't exist. But for goodness sake, let's try and do it better, and let's find a better way. Because I think that for two things, as we've sort of said throughout this conversation, entrepreneurship isn't for everybody. And if you're not cut out to be an entrepreneur, not everybody is, you should go and work for somebody and maybe be an entrepreneur at some future point when your life has changed or you're in a different position. However, if you are an entrepreneur and you have a vision and you have the ability and you have the capability to build something, then absolutely you should do it. And absolutely you should do it when you're younger, because you've got nothing to lose. So why not? And I've often said, the worst thing that could happen is you have to go and get a job, so that's great. Go and do it now. because you'll learn about what will work for you, and you might be successful or you might not, and then maybe you'll be successful the next time or the next time. So I guess that's my thoughts on the current perception of being an entrepreneur or learning to be an entrepreneur. It's great that it is a place that people can go and that it's an aspiration, but you're right, I'm not sure it should be a career choice for everyone.
As we've been discussing, there's so much more to being an entrepreneur, especially with building a team, leading a team, having a vision, driving toward that vision, onboarding people on that vision so they can walk on this journey with you, whether it's co-founders or investors or customers who are risking that with you. And that's why when I interact with younger aspiring entrepreneurs who have not yet found something, but they just want to be an entrepreneur, I usually nudge them towards getting a job first. At least they can start building some of these skills. And I wanted to ask you, what are some of the maybe underappreciated leadership skills and how can we teach them?
So, again, I have pretty firm views on this. And I don't disagree with you that people should maybe go and get a job first to see what it's like, because you get to learn some stuff. I believe that everyone should be taught how to sell, the principles of selling. It's odd because we all do it all the time subconsciously, and we don't call it selling, but it's kind of how we interact with people. But I think people should be taught the ABCs of how that interaction actually works and how to do it better. And I think that stands everybody in good stead for the rest of their lives, whether it's making friends or talking to people at parties or running their own business. But then I also think trying to understand how to work with people, how to grow a team, and how to engage people. I mean, this is all just human interaction and emotional intelligence, and how to put yourself in the shoes of somebody else and see things from their perspective, which doesn't necessarily come naturally, but it's an incredibly powerful capability and tool to help you both create a business because you can see problems from other people's perspectives, but also build a team, manage that team when things are tough or when things are good, So I think having that capability of emotional intelligence, emotional awareness is incredibly powerful. So I think more knowledge of those kinds of things, those basic human interactions and the way in which they actually work and how you can use them better would be a great place for people to start.
And you also mentioned your wife's son works with an entrepreneur that he got some advice as well.
Absolutely. And as I mentioned before, that this is a super wealthy hedge fund investor, owner of multiple very large businesses. He gets up very early and flies to work and is incredibly powerful. And Liam asked him if there was one piece of advice, what would it be? And he said, Liam, always be kind. I know it sounds like a platitude, and this is a very ruthless person in business, undoubtedly, but I think it's true. We must realize we're living on a planet of human beings, and we never know where we're going to be and what's going to happen. And I think it's really good to love one another and to be kind to one another at all times. That's true for people in business, employees, people who work with you, people around you. I think it's really important to try and be kind as much as possible.
And actually, people underestimate the power of kindness.
Completely. And it comes back.
What is one unexpected part of your entrepreneurial journey that maybe if you were in your 30s, you would have been surprised to see?
Well, there's two probably that come to mind. The first thing is your first entrepreneurial thing is unlikely to be the one that drives the big success or a big success. And you may never have a big success, but you're still a perfectly fine entrepreneur when you're just making money and getting by. And I think it's really underestimated. There's millions of entrepreneurs that we never hear of that just run businesses that tick along. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And so I think that it's something that you don't really think about because you think, well, I'm going to be an entrepreneur, then it's going to be bang big. It doesn't work the world doesn't work like that, very rarely anyway. And so I think that realizing that your first opportunity isn't necessarily going to be the one or one of the ones, and this becomes something that you do again and again. I'm already thinking about my next idea, and I don't know what it will be, but I have a bunch of ideas, and I'm sure that I'll probably do something else at some point as well. So I didn't really realize that when I started out on the entrepreneurial journey. The other thing is that the importance of being an entrepreneur, if you can do it, is vital. It's what makes the world work. So those people who can do it and have the capability to do it, I think should. And I think we have a duty to make sure that as many of those people that can do it get to do it, because they are our future and they will solve the issues and the challenges of the world for us and for our children and for our children's children. If we can help them do it, we should help them do it.
Well, it is such a liberating thought to know that each one of your ventures, especially the early ones, may not be the one, but you got to keep doing it. And the second thing, it is very powerful because the world keeps changing. The way we live, interact with each other, the way we work, the way we play, engage with each other changes. So like you said, we need entrepreneurs who are thinking about disrupting how things are happening right now, and we should be empowering them.
So there's data that shows that I think it's 85% of all net new jobs come from businesses that are less than 5 years old. So, you know what? The big companies aren't creating new jobs. It's the entrepreneurs that start new businesses that create all of the work. So if we're going to have a workforce in the future, it's entrepreneurs that are going to create the opportunities for those workers. So I think there are definitely two types of people in the world. There are people who can start businesses and can do it, and there are people who work in businesses, but they need businesses to work in, and the entrepreneurs have to create them.
So as we're wrapping up, a couple of rapid fire questions. What's one thing Google doesn't know about you?
One thing Google doesn't know about me. Yeah, I was the youngest gliding instructor in the UK for a short period of time. I was 16 years old.
Wow. How did they let you become a gliding?
I don't know. But in those days, and this was a long time ago, to be fair, the rules were different. And I enjoyed my time as a gliding instructor living in a caravan on a field in the middle of Buckinghamshire.
Are you currently surviving or thriving?
I'm thriving.
What makes you say that?
I just love everything my life gives me at the moment. Yeah, I'm super happy with driving my car around the country lanes, with fixing my boat. There hasn't been much great weather to go sailing in it, but I'm painting it, so that's really nice. And seeing my kids grow up.
And what are you currently geeking out on?
So currently I'm geeking out on, actually, we were talking about the way in which entrepreneurship is taught. And, I'm excited to be doing small guest lecturing gigs at various universities and seeing how the next generation of entrepreneurs are learning about how to be an entrepreneur. And I'm really interested in the mechanics of that and how it works. And not only that, but how much it costs to learn how to be an entrepreneur, which is fascinating. I'm just geeking out on that process at the moment, which maybe is ripe for disruption.
Yep, definitely. Sign me up. What question do you have for me?
So I guess the next question I have for you is, when can I come back on your wonderful podcast and reflect back on the things that we've seen and what the audience thinks?
Yes, as soon as these first few ones are out. There's so much we didn't get into, but Andrew, thank you so much for sharing your journey and your perspective. It's really energizing and inspiring. Thank you so much for being you.
It's my pleasure to be me all the time, Gigi.
Thank you for tuning into this week's episode. Subscribe to our newsletter at beyond42.co and find out how we work with founders on their journey of success and leadership beyond the product. We deeply appreciate the support of our community on our journey. We love sharing these inspiring stories and practical insights. Please follow us and leave us a review, as it really helps us. Subscribe to the Beyond 42 podcast on your favorite streaming platform to catch upcoming episodes.